Ay makakaw. Oh. Okay, so Lucy Peabody is the person who we have been researching about and translating letters about. And tonight we'd just like to share a little bit about who she is, the letters that we have been translating, and some of the valuable insights that we have come across in our work over the last 3 months. So this is John, Aulani, and Kaliko. So aloha mai kako, and we just want to share over the next half an hour with you folks about some of the valuable content that we've just been immersing ourselves in over these last few months. So with that, I believe Kaliko will begin talking about Lucy Peabody.
Hi, mahalo, John. Just like John said, we began studying Lucy Peabody. These are her many names. She's known as Lucy Kaupau Kahehe Malie Kumala Lehua Davis Peabody, also known as Luke, Luki, El Kaupaulu, Peabody, Peabody, and various other kinds of written forms. John and I and Hina as well got an opportunity to work with some letters, so it's kind of reminiscent of some of the Ali'i letters and the handwriting. This is kind of Lucy's sphere, her social network, if you will. G.D. Hu'eu, o Kalamai. Let me back up a little bit. Lucy was born in 1840. She lived until 1928. I'm just going to list a few people that received letters. And so John is going to speak about a little bit the intercourse between some of the family members. But essentially, Lucy Peabody, from her young, when she was a young girl, she was in the court of Queen Emma. And that is tied back to the John Young, Olohana, and Davis connection, familial connection there. And so she was in the court of Queen Emma, and many of the letters conclude with E aloha kui ke ali'i, and we've sort of concluded that that ke ali'i is referred to Queen Emma, who is with Lucy at the time these letters are being written. G.H. Davis Jr. is sort of the patriarch of the family, and so that's his signature there. Mama Kalapuna, who you can tell by her signature, is a little older in age when she's composing some of these letters by her unsteady hand. And so H. Ka'ilihiva is also referred to as Mama. So there are definitely these kinship terms that are tossed around throughout these letters that required some working instead of Makua, Uncle, Makua Hine, the matriarch, etc., etc. And then there's Kau'i Aino Ki'ilai, who often correspond with Lucy Peabody because G.H. Davis Jr. was allotted that land in Ki'ilai, in Kona. And the Ka'ahumanu Society, when Lucy was president. Those of you folks who listen to Kaleo Hawaii HV 24, Real 17, Mary, Kalei, I have it in my notes and I'm not even looking.
Kalehua Kaleikoa.
Kalehua Kaleikoa, and she talks about the president, and Lucy is accredited with a couple lines of the Ahahui Ahumanu anthem. So that's a little bit about Lucy. Lucy Lani Kumai Ki'iki Henriquez is also an important figure in Lucy's life because she inherited all of Lucy's wealth. And so I went and visited the Davis Ohana at the Oahu Cemetery. And this is a picture that I took. And all the blue arrows are some of the people that corresponded with Lucy, some of the letters that were from there. And they have a little family lot right next to the Judds on Oahu Cemetery. So we got to give our aloha to Lucy and bring her and let her know about what we're doing. Mahalo.
Nice. Next.
Okay, so this letter collection is from the Hawaii State Archives. And these are actually letters, although it's the Lucy Peabody collection, these letters do not include letters written by Lucy Peabody herself. These are letters that are a compilation of letters written by many authors. Many of them are her family members, but these are letters that are sent to Lucy Peabody. In this collection, there are approximately 170 letters in total. A few of them are in English. The length of the letters range from about a quarter page to 5+ pages. And this, obviously there's differences in handwriting style and size of handwriting of people, but we did have some letters that exceeded 5 or I think maybe even 6 pages, some of them. There are approximately 50 different authors, and many of them are from within her family. The majority are from within her family. There are a myriad of topics within the letters. The majority often have to do with family updates related to the family, marriages, births, illnesses, deaths, and there's oftentimes requests that are made for money or supplies, and mention is oftentimes made of land-related concerns. So these are often the topics that appear in the letters. We also began translating a few newspaper articles, although our primary goal has been to complete the Lucy Peabody collection of handwritten letters. In the newspaper articles, we see her influence in the community and her important role as president of the Ka'ahumanu Society. And so the newspapers give us a glimpse into her life in the community and her influence in the community, whereas the handwritten letters give information about her role within her family. And so those are the kind of two differences from the newspaper to the handwritten letters. Next slide, please. Here is an example of a quite clear and legible letter that isn't too difficult to transcribe. There's a wide range of clarity in the letters. Some are very easy to transcribe, some are quite difficult. As you can see, this is pretty easy to make out. The font is good size. The letters are quite readable. Next slide. This is one of the more difficult letters that we've come across that we had to transcribe. As you can see, it's indistinct and time-worn. The paper is tattered and the lettering is smudged. And this is a challenge that we have come across in several of the letters. It takes us extra time, and sometimes it even takes us up till our review session to kind of iron out exactly what is being said. And so this sometimes takes us a little bit more time, but that's kind of the range of the types of letters we've come across. Next slide, please. There are 3 sets of letters, set 1, set 2, and set 3. The first third of the letters range from 1865 to 1893. The next third of the letters ranged from 1894 to 1896. And the final third of the letters ranged from 1897 to 1899. So as you can see, the majority of the letters come from the 1890s, although we did have a few from earlier in the 1800s. And these are just screenshots of the dates. So you can see that one from 1865, you can see one from 1895, and one from 1898. Another feature of these little screenshots is that you can see that Lucy Peabody's name is on the first top one. You see Kaupaulu on the second one, and you see Kahehe Malie on the third one. And she is addressed in several different ways, as Kaliko was mentioning, and these are just 3 of the names that she goes by. And so throughout the letters, we see various names that she's addressed as. Next slide, please. So to date, we have translated about 120 of these letters from within the collection and about 20 newspaper articles. So in terms of like Word document pages, this has been about 170 pages so far. Of course, one of the features that the variations from within the letters is that depending on the size of the handwritten letters, sometimes we have a really skinny column in our Hawaiian transcribed text because, you know, we're going page by page and sometimes there's just not a lot of text on certain pages, whereas sometimes it's a really wide left column. And so we kind of have a variation in our links. So about approximately 170 pages we've been able to translate so far. Next slide, please.
Aloha kako. This slide that you're looking at here is pretty much representative of where majority of the letters are being written from. Ki'ilai is probably Ki'ilai and Kauai and Holualoa. It carries the bulk of where the authors are writing from. There are some letters that are being written from people in Honolulu to Lucy who is on Oahu. There are a few that are from Maui, but you're pretty much looking at where, what communities are writing to her with their concerns, like John mentioned in his slide. So this kind of just gives us an idea of where her family is dispersed while she's on Oahu, because many of them are related to her directly. And because she is an ali'i and in the presence of Emma, there's a lot of dependence, I think, on those relationships. So I think when you look at where the letters come from in this kind of graphic, it kind of gives you an idea of, you know, what is happening and where it's happening, at least in a particular period of time on Hawaii Island. Next slide, please. When our group discussed how we might describe the value of picking an Ohina like this, and then going through several months of translation, and then kind of reflecting back on what we've accomplished so far, I think that each of us have different perspectives on what that might be, and I think that changes frequently as we begin to understand the narrative more and more. But I think for the purposes of our training in this particular Ohina, I think it's important to recognize that we're working with primary source documents, and that that is different than the other documents that we've worked with in the past. For example, newspaper and Kamakau's narrative, where they're secondary source documents. So I think the personal nature of letters provides a certain kind of narrative that you would not normally be privy to if you weren't digging in these kinds of letters. So then to take that a step further and understand the concept of translating something out of its primary source and creating it, like almost making it a secondary source document by putting it into the language it wasn't originally composed in, it kind of, it's something you have to be aware of. I think we've learned, or at least I have learned to be aware of over time, that sometimes I get caught up in the mechanics of translation that I often forget the fact that where the act of translating it removes it from its primary source space, right? So when you consider that and consider the fact that these letters are coming from communities where people are experiencing life in a way that there isn't a narrative present in our history. I mean, we're reading through these letters and we're learning about how, you know, illness and how widespread it is in the family, and how do you deal with an illness when you're living in Kiholo and the medicine isn't available in your community. What is the role of an ali'i like Lucy Peabody, and what are her responsibilities to where she controls land, or where she has responsibility and authority over law and land and influence in the circles that she's living in? So I feel like there is this real, by bringing the letters into English and translating it and having us understand the stories and the history that's happening in these areas, that there is a reclamation of narrative occurring, especially when you look at history over this time period and consider what it was like to experience what was happening in the late 19th century in Hawaii. And I think that that is actually, I mean, that goes into every community and in every family. And it just, there's just a lot to, that you start to realize that there is a lot that you're missing in when you consider what's happened in the past. So those are just some things that I think are valuable by choosing this group of letters. I think I touched on this a little bit in the beginning about how it relates to us. And I think when I reflect on the growth or the learning in translating letters that are very personal between family members, I'm very careful, or I've learned to understand the role of a translator in a very different way. And I think John and Kaliko are going to bring up some examples of that, but just the kind of language, for example, that's used between family members in very emotional times when you have a loved one that is very sick or a very young child that they cannot seem to make better. The Hawaiian changes in ways that I think we haven't, the language is different than things that we've seen before in other collections. So, yeah, that's about it. Next slide.
So expounding off of what Aulani was mentioning earlier, if I was to kind of give a title to this stack of papers, it'd probably be called Health and Wealth Digest, because that's really predominantly what these letters are about. So anyone who is in the healthcare field or the economics field would never think to look at a stack of letters and provide them the same kind of research, primary research resources that they would require to do a study of maybe Hawaiian Kingdom healthcare and economics during the span of these letters. And so that's something that's really important. And just to highlight, if one were to take it in the healthcare direction, that here they're not meant to be, I'm not going to read them all to you, but here you can see that at the signing of at the conclusion of every letter, there's a little blurb about who is sick in the community, who is sick in the family, how are they doing, and who has died. And I leave it up to the experts to really dissect those kinds of things, but just overall, the amount of reports of the sick and the dead, and the amount they have occurred, the innumerable amounts that almost, I would say maybe 80 to 90% of these letters conclude with such regards as, this is who is sick, this is who is getting better, and this is who has passed. And so this is one little thing in the many strands of things that one could take from a letter if they were to bring this to the classroom. I think it's talking about healthcare, it's in the age of COVID, how were they articulating staying safe, or this reporting about their communities and how are they sort of dealing with disease and illness, which is very pertinent today. So the next slide, please, is just a very specific example. You can see here, there are three people. Mama is getting better like before. Isaac is going there. He's sick sometimes, he's good sometimes, and Kiawakea has died. That's all Wahine Nui, and she signs her names. And I guess what I'm trying to get back to is there must be some loina, some custom in a conclusion of every note. If we send a text message or an email to a family member, we gotta say in our household, hey, so-and-so was sick, but they're doing fine. Love to the Chiefs, Meki aloha. And maybe some of those aspects we could bring back into our Olelo Hawaii. And John is going to speak a little bit about that.
Next slide, please. All right, so this here is just a snippet really from one of the letters, and Aulani began talking about how in the discourse between the people in the letters, oftentimes they're expressing what they're going through. They're expressing very emotional times that they're going through back home, and they, you know, they have requests, they have reports about family members. And I chose this one because when I reflected upon my time, you know, formally learning Olelo Hawaii, I realized that many of these phrases within this paragraph, I wasn't taught them, you know, not by the fault of anybody, but just, you know, maybe perhaps even the teachers that didn't come across these. This is like from the 1800s, right? So what we're learning from some of these letters is that there are phrases, there's a lot of phrases within here that we can reintroduce and be using on a day-to-day basis, perhaps. And I'm just gonna read through this, and I think that everybody's gonna see some of these phrases, and I think everybody's gonna understand what they're saying, but they're gonna see the style with which it's said, and it's quite, it's just interesting. We found it very interesting. So I'll do a quick read through. You can either follow along in the Olelo Hawaii or the Olelo Haole. Pehea aku nei la na wahi kanaka I holo aku nei, me oi no paha kahi ino hoi. Ua olelo aku paha kahi keiki la I ka wahine, e hoi aku ana me oi e noho ai. Au e noho I kako e, pehea aku ana la. E helelo aku ana paha I ka paakai. Mehe mea la no ea, ke mau nei no ko umanao, e hoi ho ana no wau. Au hea e nei kahi leo pane mai e. Pene ia, o kakala hui ia I kali aku nei. O kai ala no kai I mai. E ho manawa nui. E hia la manawa, a pehea la ka lo ihi. Kupai anaha. E aloha ka ua anui me ka poina ole, kaupo ki I Mary. So this is just one example of kind of, you can almost imagine a person saying these types of phrases, but they're putting it into their words on the letters. And we're taking away a lot from these types of phrases, and feel that, you know, we can start to use these more often in our daily speech. Next slide, please. I think, yeah. So this is just another example. I'm not gonna read through these two, but I think that these slides are available to all of us. And so we just chose 3 examples of how these types of phrases are used. And it's almost colloquial phrases that are being used. Next slide. This is a third one that we chose. And so if folks are interested in going back and looking at some of the use of these phrases, the meaning is very clear, but it's just the way that the words are put together that is refreshing to see. Next slide. Okay, so to conclude the presentation, this was a very recent letter that we came across that was quite amusing. And so titled this slide, An Unusual Request. See if anybody, you know, off the top of their head can figure out what belongs in these blanks, how to translate it. So it goes like this. This is the entirety of the letter. It's only a quarter page long. But it says, Aloha oi, ua hiki mai ka manao e kau aku I wahi leka ia oi, no komako wahi pilikia I ka aila kukui. E ho'ona mai oi I pahu aila, a I pahu waiu kia, na kahi kaikamahine a olua. I waiu loke, a ole mai kai o ka waiu manu, he mai ka opu, o la o wau no. Anyway, this was just an interesting thing that we came across. We're talking about condensed milk, and we're wondering what Vayu Loke is and what is Vayu Manu.
Those
So
are
next
3 brands.
All right.
There are 3
Oh,
different
you took
brands.
away his cool.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were asking, and here I was getting.
Yeah. Next slide.
No, we know. Yeah.
You blew that one. All right, next.
Great. So this is our Vayu Loke and our Vayu Manu, which is the Eagle brand and the Carnation brand evaporated milk. And just quite interesting, because although that makes so much sense, you know, I'm not, you know, do people use those phrases today? It was quite confusing at first, but looking up brands of condensed milk back from the 1800s, these brands existed back then, and that was their term that they used to reference them. So anyway, just kind of a
Well, that's cool.
yeah,
They're
it's
still
kind of a
around
cool
today.
thing. That. Yeah, and they're still around today, you know, and this is what they were requesting for the baby.
John, do you have Wayukia? Is there a picture for Wayukia? It's a popular one. It gets talked about, like Kaleo Hawaii, they talk about it. It's a sweetened one.
Well, it was a what was the image on the?
It of course had a deer on the front.
Oh yeah. So it was called Vayu. So that's interesting how Vayukia became like the condensed milk, and then now it's Vayukia, Vayu Manu, and then Vayu Loke.
The market.
Yeah. But like, what is bird milk? You know, but anyway.
Mahalo Pa'ani.
So that with that we conclude our short presentation. Any questions or manao that we can address? We don't know.
Yes.
Anybody has any thoughts they want to talk about?
Can I just toss in? You also had letters that showed Lucy to be isn't she the treasurer of the Huial Ha'aino na Wahine? Did I make that up?
I don't recall that offhand. Do you?
Not a letter, but a newspaper article.
Okay, but yeah, she had the role of treasurer, was it not?
Yes.
Okay, I mean that's an interesting interlock between the other groups.
Well, that's in a set that they just got, so you guys haven't had time to go through that yet. You will. But she was the treasurer of Huial Ha'aina.
Mahalo, hui hui.
Any questions anybody got for them? Okay.
Oh, did we get? Oh, you gave the numbers, right? How many and whatnot.
Yeah.
Actually, I do have a question. Just in that, I mean, when this came up, we were talking about potential Ohina, and you had heard the Lucy Peabody collection. You know, and 200 untranslated letters. How cool is this? She's an interesting character. You had no idea when you received it that none of them were from her, right?
Yeah, because it's the Lucy Peabody collection. So, you know, their first guess was that it was written by her, but
Yeah,
I guess it was, they collected them and then.
Can you speak a little bit to that? You know, I mean, how communication, this is not unique to this, is we hear about some resource. When you reach in, it might not be exactly what you anticipated, you know, so
Yeah.
getting a clear idea.
Yeah, so I think although the letters weren't written by her, we can see that we can, by the requests and by the nature of the words within the letters, we can see the ways that she was viewed by those who were writing to her. So we can get an idea of the role that she played in the lives of her family members by the types of requests that were made to her and the types of phrases and the words that were you know, what they're telling her about. They ask her, like another example is somebody writes to her requesting for a baby's name because Lucy Peabody is the one who understands all the sides of the family. So although she's not writing the letter, we get the understanding that she's like a matriarch of the family because they're relying on her for certain information and for certain supplies.
And this sort of, the port of entry is, of course, the State Archives had her personal file drawer of letters that she saved, both family letters and business letters. And that sort of illuminates, well, if these are the ones she kept, where are the ones she sent? So being able to identify some of the folks that were writing to her, looking in their collections, which might be Bishop Museum, might be Historical Society, there might be other places where you'd actually find letters from her where she wouldn't be the highlight, because I like what Kelly has brought in from Bishop Museum, the Queen Emma collection, of course, had letters from Lucy Peabody. So, using this first block as a launching pad for other places to go. If I was a teacher, you'd want to use this to lead them off to, okay, where would we find letters from Lucy? Yeah. So it's a great launching pad.
Did you guys have a favorite letter or something you found out that was totally mind-blowing?
There's some shady deals with the land. Like, so the LCA is George Hueu, right? But there's all this shady stuff going on between the actual community members in the Hui, outside people that have come in, like Po'epake, and then some other leadership. And we're just starting to get into those letters that are going back and forth and sending representatives to Honolulu to file land claims and bring them before the court. And it's just starting to become a real mess. And what's really interesting is you don't really know whose side to be on. You don't know who's saying what quite yet, because you only have like snapshots of the story. And every letter you're reading is told passionately from the author's perspective, but he might be the crook. Like, you don't know. So that's sort of interesting, to see how that might play out. And it makes you kind of wonder, like, oh, I really need to be responsible about historical perspective at that time. And, and really kind of keep the tone of some of the word choice. It's been challenging to pick the right words, whether or not like Hana Ino is like super strong or a little bit not so good, or that kind of stuff.
Oh, Lundy, I just want to comment on that whole getting the land surveyed. And then there was a follow-up letter saying, keep this someplace secret because it's not recorded yet. So,
yeah.
That hide it away.
It's interesting to consider if this got into the hands of family members that have LCAs in different areas, or where the way the land has transferred since then, how that may or may not change what people think about what happened.
Can I add in I really appreciate your bringing up the thing about the responsibility of translating. And I mean, we talk about that in all of the translation we do. And oftentimes we are the only door, who's ever doing the translation is the doorway to that for a broader audience. But there is almost another level of that in personal primary source, materials that it sort of intensifies that responsibility and the concern that goes with it. So I just appreciate that being mindful of that all the time is really worthwhile.